Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're digging into a really fascinating legal battle, a 35-year executive versus a corporate giant. At its core, this case asks a simple but powerful question. When a company's rules and the government's rules clash, which one wins?
So let's set the stage. Our story starts with Ricardo Paloma. This guy dedicated 35 years of his life to Philippine Airlines, starting way back in 1957. He climbed all the way to Senior Vice President for Finance and retired in 1992, right when PAL was going from being government-controlled to a private company.
And here's where things get interesting. When Paloma retired, he had 450 days of unused sick leave saved up. Think about that. That's way more than a year's worth of paid time off. He believed he was entitled to get the full cash value for all of it. A pretty substantial amount of money, as you can imagine.
Now you'd think that would be a simple yes or no question, right? Well, not in this case. This one question kicked off a legal fight that lasted for years, bouncing from one court to the next all the way up to the Supreme Court, and just about everyone had a different answer. All right, let's get into it.
Here's our roadmap for how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the claim itself, get to the heart of the legal argument, then ride the legal roller coaster through the courts, and finally unpack that big Supreme Court decision. Okay, first things first, the facts of the case. Let's get a really clear picture of what was going on here. So Paloma gets his initial retirement pay, over 5 million pesos. But, and this is super important, when he signed the release form, he added a little note. He made it crystal clear that he was not giving up his claim for the extra money he believed he was owed for all that sick leave.
And that brings us right to the main event. The whole case really boiled down to one single question. Which rulebook applied here? Was it a government executive order, or was it Philippine Airlines' own internal company policy?
Paloma's entire case was built on this, Executive Order 1077. This was a rule for government employees, and it was unambiguous. It said you could cash out all of your accumulated leave when you retire, with absolutely no cap.
And right here, you can see the two worlds just colliding. On one side, you have the government rule saying unlimited cash out. But PAL's internal policy told a totally different story. It set a hard limit of 230 days for sick leave. Yeah, you could cash out any days you earned over that limit each year, but the policy was silent on cashing out that base of 230 days upon retirement.
So why was this so confusing? Well, it was because of PAL's weird history. For a long time, the Government Service Insurance System, or GSIS, owned most of PAL. That made it a government-owned and controlled corporation, a GOCC. And that status really blurred the line between whether its workers were public employees or private ones.
So, with this huge conflict at its center, Paloma's case went to court. But he didn't get a straight answer. Oh no. What followed was a years-long legal roller coaster, with each court giving a completely different opinion.
I mean, just look at this mess. First, the labor arbiter says PAL is private, but awards 162 days anyway. Then the National Labor Relations Commission agrees with that, but wait, then they change their minds and bump it up to 230 days. And the Court of Appeals? They went back and forth, dismissing the case entirely before reversing themselves. With this much confusion, you just knew it was headed for the Supreme Court.
So, after this long, winding, and frankly contradictory journey, the Supreme Court finally stepped in to settle things once and for all.
And the court's decision was a big one. They sided completely with Philippine Airlines. The final verdict was that PAL's own internal policy was the only rule that mattered here, not the government's. Paloma's claim was dismissed.
Okay, so we know PAL won, but the really important question is why. To understand that, we need to look at what lawyers call the ratio decidendi, which is just a fancy way of saying the core legal reason behind the decision.
And it all came down to this one powerful idea from the court. They decided that even though the government owned a majority stake for years, PAL had always been run like a private company, and that meant public sector rules just didn't apply.
And the court had plenty of proof to back this up. I mean, think about it. PAL's employees were covered by the private sector's labor code, not civil service rules. Their pay and benefits were determined by company policy and union agreements, not by government pay grades. They even had unions that could go on strike, a classic feature of a private business. All the evidence pointed in one direction. PAL was a private company through and through.
So what did this all mean for Paloma in the end? And maybe more importantly, what does this case mean for millions of other private sector employees?
Well, the court's math was pretty simple.
They found that Paloma had already been paid for the 58 days of leave he earned above the 230-day cap, exactly as the company policy allowed. But as for that base of 230 days, the policy just never said you could cash those out when you retire, so that part of his claim was denied.
And this right here is the major takeaway, the legal principle this whole case established. If you work for a private company, the ability to cash out your unused leave is not an automatic right. It is a benefit that you are only entitled to if and only if it is explicitly written down, word for word, in your company's policy or in a union contract.
And that leaves us with a final, thought-provoking question. When a company's very identity changes like this, who ends up bearing the cost of promises that may have been understood one way but are written down another? In this case, a 35-year career ended with a hard lesson in legal reality. Thanks for joining this explainer.